In a quiet corner of Washington, D.C., things seemed calm on the surface. But sometimes the calmest moments are just the pause before the storm hits. Jasmine Crockett had been making waves lately. She was someone who believed in speaking her mind and standing up for what she thought was right. Her speeches were fiery, her words sharp, and her confidence unshakable. People admired her passion, and many saw her as a rising star with the potential to shake up the system. But there's always someone watching from the sidelines, someone who might not agree with everything being said. Across town, Pam Bondi wasn't sitting idle. Known for her no-nonsense attitude and razor-sharp focus, Bondi had built a career out of taking on tough challenges. She had heard enough about Crockett's bold statements during recent debates and public appearances. To Bondi, some of those claims felt exaggerated or even misleading. It wasn't just about disagreeing, it was about setting the record straight. And when Bondi decided to step into the ring, she didn't do it halfway. Crockett, meanwhile, had no idea what was coming. She was busy preparing for another high-profile event, thinking about how to inspire people and push her agenda forward. She trusted her team, her message, and her ability to connect with others. What she didn't see was that behind the scenes, Bondi was gathering information, reviewing past interviews, and piecing together a strategy. This wasn't going to be a casual disagreement. It was shaping up to be something much bigger. The tension started building days before their paths crossed again. Social media buzzed with anticipation as rumors spread about a possible confrontation. Fans of both women weighed in, defending their favorite while questioning the other's motives. Some accused Bondi of waiting too long to speak up, while others wondered if Crockett was overplaying her hand. The atmosphere grew thicker with every passing hour, and by the time they found themselves in the same room, everyone could feel the electricity in the air. Neither woman walked into that room, expecting an easy conversation. For Crockett, it was another chance to shine, to rally support and prove why she deserved the spotlight. For Bondi, it was a moment to challenge, not just Crockett's ideas, but also the way she presented them. Both were ready, but only one would leave feeling like they'd truly made their point. And as fate would have it, this meeting wasn't just going to change their relationship, it was going to change how people saw them forever. Little did anyone know, this was just the beginning of a story that would dominate headlines and spark debates across the country. The day of the event arrived, and the room was packed with reporters, cameras, and spectators, eager to witness what everyone had been talking about. The air buzzed with anticipation as people whispered among themselves, speculating how things would unfold. Would it be a heated exchange, a respectful debate, or something entirely unexpected? Jasmine Crockett took the stage first, walking confidently under the bright lights. She smiled at the crowd, her presence commanding attention. Her speech started strong, full of passion and conviction. She spoke about fairness, accountability, and standing up for those who couldn't stand up for themselves. Her words resonated with many in the audience, drawing nods of agreement and even applause at times. But then, midway through her talk, she veered into territory that made some people uneasy. She began criticizing figures who opposed her views, though she didn't name names directly. It was clear, however, that her comments were aimed at certain individuals, including one person in particular. When her time on stage ended, the room remained charged. People clapped politely, but there was an unmistakable tension hanging in the air. Then came Pam Bondi's turn. As she stepped up to the podium, the energy shifted immediately. Where Crockett had been fiery and emotional, Bondi exuded calmness and precision. There was no theatrics, no raised voice, just a steady gaze and a tone that demanded attention. Bondi began by acknowledging the importance of the issues being discussed. She agreed with some points Crockett had raised, which caught many off guard. For a moment it seemed like this might not turn into the showdown everyone expected, but then Bondi pivoted. With surgical accuracy, she addressed the claims Crockett had made earlier. One by one, she dismantled them using facts, data, and examples from previous statements Crockett herself had given. She pointed out inconsistencies, moments where Crockett's current stance contradicted things she'd said before. For instance, Bondi highlighted a specific policy proposal Crockett had championed recently. She pulled up quotes from interviews Crockett had done months ago, showing how her position on the issue had shifted dramatically without any clear explanation. "If we're going to have these conversations," Bondi said firmly, "we need to be honest about where we stand and why." Her delivery wasn't harsh or mocking. It was measured, almost clinical, and that's what made it so effective. Every point she raised landed like a hammer strike, leaving little room for rebuttal. As Bondi continued, you could see the change in Crockett's demeanor from where she sat in the front row. At first, she tried to maintain her composure, nodding occasionally as if unfazed. But as Bondi's arguments piled up, cracks began to show. Crockett shifted in her seat, glanced at her team, and even let out a small sigh at one point. It was subtle, but those watching closely noticed. The confidence she displayed earlier seemed to waver slightly under the weight of Bondi's relentless logic. By the time Bondi finished speaking, the room was silent. Not the kind of silence that comes after polite applause, but the kind that happens when people are processing something significant. Reporters scribbled furiously in their notebooks, while camera operators adjusted their lenses to capture reactions from both women. Some members of the audience exchanged glances, unsure whether to applaud or simply sit quietly. Bondi thanked the crowd and stepped away from the podium, her expression calm and composed. Crockett, now back in the spotlight for closing remarks, struggled to regain her footing. She attempted to address Bondi's points, but her responses felt rushed and defensive. Rather than tackling the specifics Bondi had laid out, she leaned heavily on generalities and appeals to emotion. It wasn't enough to counteract the impact Bondi had already made. By the end of the event, it was clear to everyone present, and soon to millions more watching online, that something monumental had just happened. What started as a routine discussion had turned into a defining moment. For both women. For Crockett, it was a wake-up call. For Bondi, it was validation of her approach and preparation. Neither walked away unchanged, and neither realized yet just how far-reaching the consequences of this confrontation would be. The battle lines had been drawn, and the world was watching. The morning after the event, it felt like the entire country was talking about what had happened. Social media lit up with posts, memes, and heated discussions. News outlets couldn't get enough of it. Headlines blared variations of phrases, like Bondi strikes back and Crockett under fire after debate showdown. Clips from the event were everywhere, especially the parts where Bondi calmly dismantled Crockett's arguments. Those clips went viral almost instantly, racking up millions of views within hours. For Jasmine Crockett, waking up to this kind of attention wasn't the dream scenario she might have imagined. Instead of praise for her fiery speech, the focus was squarely on how Bondi had countered her. Supporters of Crockett rushed to defend her online, accusing Bondi of being too cold or calculated. They argued that passion mattered more than facts in a debate because it showed heart. But critics weren't buying it. Many pointed out that while enthusiasm could inspire people, it didn't excuse misleading statements or shifting positions. The backlash grew louder by the hour. Pam Bondi, on the other hand, seemed unfazed by the whirlwind surrounding her performance. She gave a few interviews but kept them short and focused. In each one, she reiterated the same message. This wasn't personal. It was about truth and accountability. She emphasized that she respected anyone willing to step into the arena and fight for their beliefs, but added, "When we make claims, we have a responsibility to back them up with honesty and evidence." Her calm demeanor resonated with many viewers who appreciated her straightforward approach. Meanwhile, the divide between their supporters deepened. Online forums and comment sections became battlegrounds. People dissected every word both women had said, replaying moments from the event over and over. Some defended Crockett fiercely, saying Bondi's critique was overly harsh or nitpicky. Others praised Bondi for holding her ground without resorting to insults or theatrics. Even late-night talk show hosts jumped into the fray, using the incident as fodder for jokes and monologues. One comedian quipped, "If debates were boxing matches, Bondi just knocked Crockett out in the first round and didn't even break a sweat." Amid all the noise, there were quieter conversations happening too. Friends debated over coffee, colleagues whispered during lunch breaks, and families argued at dinner tables. Some wondered if the whole thing was blown out of proportion. If, maybe two strong voices simply clashed in a way that made headlines but didn't change much in the grand scheme of things. Others saw it as a turning point, proof that public figures needed to be held accountable when they spoke carelessly or inconsistently. Behind the scenes, Crockett's team scrambled to respond. They huddled in emergency meetings, trying to figure out how to regain control of the narrative. Should she issue a clarification, apologize for any misunderstandings, or double down and accuse Bondi of twisting her words? Opinions were split. Some advisors urged caution, warning that another misstep could damage her reputation further. Others pushed for a bold move, a direct rebuttal aimed at reclaiming the spotlight. Crockett herself struggled to decide. She knew she couldn't ignore the situation, but every option came with risks. Bondi, meanwhile, stayed several steps ahead. She met with key allies and strategized ways to keep the momentum going. While Crockett's camp debated their next move, Bondi was already planning appearances on major news programs. She carefully chose her words, ensuring her message remained consistent. This wasn't about tearing anyone down. It was about building trust through transparency. Her ability to stay composed and focused earned her even more respect, not just from her supporters but also from neutral observers. As days passed, the story continued to dominate headlines. For Crockett, the pressure mounted. Every new article or social media post felt like another blow. Donors began hesitating to commit funds, worried about associating with someone embroiled in controversy. Invitations to speak at high-profile events started drying up. Even some of her closest allies privately questioned whether she had bitten off more than she could chew. It was a tough spot to be in, and Crockett knew she had to act fast, or risk losing everything she'd worked so hard to build. But Bondi wasn't resting on her laurels either. She understood that winning one battle didn't mean the war was over. Public opinion could shift quickly, and she needed to ensure her message stayed relevant. So, she kept pushing forward, speaking at community events, engaging with grassroots organizations, and emphasizing the importance of integrity and leadership. Her efforts paid off, solidifying her position as someone who could handle tough situations with grace and determination. By the end of the week, it was clear that the fallout from the event would linger for a long time. For Crockett, it was a wake-up call. A reminder that words carry weight and actions have consequences. For Bondi, it was validation of her belief that preparation and authenticity can cut through the noise. And for everyone else watching, it was a lesson in how quickly fortunes can change in the world of politics. The drama wasn't over yet, but one thing was certain. Neither woman would forget this chapter anytime soon. Behind closed doors, the tension was palpable. Jasmine Crockett sat in a dimly lit conference room, surrounded by her closest advisors and team members. The mood was heavy, like the air before a storm. Everyone had their own opinion on what went wrong and how to fix it, but no one could agree on the best way forward. Some argued that the solution was simple: issue a public apology, clarify any misunderstandings, and move on. Others believed apologizing would only make things worse. It would look like admitting defeat. Instead, they pushed for a counterattack, urging Crockett to go on the offensive and call out Bondi's tactics as overly aggressive or unfair. Crockett listened quietly, her hands clasped tightly together on the table. She looked exhausted, the kind of tired that comes from sleepless nights spent replaying every word she'd said at the event. Her confidence, once unshakable, now felt fragile. For the first time in her career, she doubted herself. Was she too emotional? Did she not prepare enough? Or was this just the cost of stepping into the spotlight and taking bold stands? Her team debated fiercely, voices rising as tempers flared. One advisor leaned across the table, pointing out that the public backlash wasn't slowing down. Social media was still ablaze with criticism, and key allies were starting to distance themselves. Another chimed in, reminding everyone that perception mattered more than reality in these situations. "People don't care if you're right," he said bluntly. "They care if you look right." It was harsh, but it hit home. Crockett nodded slowly, absorbing the weight of his words. On the other side of town, Pam Bondi was also meeting with her team, but the atmosphere couldn't have been more different. There was calmness in the room, a sense of purpose and unity. Bondi sat at the head of the table, sipping coffee while reviewing notes from her recent interviews. She didn't seem stressed or rushed. Instead, she exuded the quiet confidence of someone who knew exactly where they stood. Her team praised her performance at the event, calling it a masterclass in composure and strategy. But Bondi didn't let the compliments go to her head. She reminded them that this wasn't about winning points. It was about making sure people understood the importance of accountability. "We can't afford to get sloppy now," she said firmly. "This is bigger than me or anyone else in the room. If we want to keep people's trust, we need to stay consistent and focused." With that, she outlined her plan for the coming days. More interviews, yes, but also outreach to communities directly affected by the issues discussed during the debate. Bondi wanted to show that her intentions weren't just about scoring political victories, they were about creating real change. Back in Crockett's camp, the disagreements showed no signs of stopping. As the hours dragged on, frustration grew. One member suggested releasing a video statement where Crockett addressed the criticisms head-on. Another shot the idea down, saying it would come across as desperate. A third proposed organizing a town hall meeting to reconnect with supporters and remind them why they'd rallied behind her in the first place. Each suggestion sparked another round of arguments, leaving Crockett feeling more overwhelmed than ever. Finally, she raised a hand to silence the room. "Enough," she said, her voice firm but tinged with exhaustion. "We're going in circles. Here, let's focus on what matters, the truth." She took a deep breath, then laid out her decision. She wouldn't apologize, not yet anyway, but she would address the concerns people had raised. She planned to sit down with a trusted journalist for an exclusive interview, explaining her perspective without sounding defensive. It was risky, but she felt it was the only way to reclaim some control over the narrative. As the meeting wrapped up, Crockett stayed behind, staring at her reflection in the darkened window. She thought about all the sacrifices she'd made to get here, the late nights, the tough decisions, the moments when she'd put her career ahead of everything else. Had it all been worth it? Could she recover from this setback? Or was this the beginning of the end? These questions swirled in her mind unanswered as she finally turned off the lights and headed home. Bondi, meanwhile, ended her day by reviewing clips of the event one last time. She wasn't doing it to gloat or relive her victory. She wanted to ensure she hadn't missed anything. Accountability, after all, worked both ways. As she watched Crockett's reactions during the debate, she allowed herself a brief moment of empathy. She knew what it was like to be under fire, to feel the weight of expectations pressing down on you. But empathy didn't mean letting up. Bondi believed in fairness, and part of being fair was holding others to the same standards you held yourself. Before heading to bed, Bondi sent a quick text to her team. "Tomorrow is another day. Stay sharp." Then she turned off her phone and sat by the window, watching the city lights flicker in the distance. She knew this fight wasn't over, not by a long shot. But for now, she allowed herself a small measure of satisfaction. She had done what she set out to do, speak the truth, even when it wasn't easy. And sometimes that was enough. The next phase of this unfolding drama began with Jasmine Crockett stepping back into the spotlight. This time, she was determined to take control of the narrative. Her exclusive interview with a well-known journalist aired live on national television, and it marked her first real attempt to address the backlash head-on. Dressed in a tailored suit that screamed professionalism, Crockett walked onto the set with her usual confidence. But there was something different about her demeanor. Gone was the fiery bravado. Instead, she carried herself with a quieter, more reflective energy. From the moment the camera started rolling, Crockett leaned heavily into authenticity. She admitted that some of her earlier statements may have been misinterpreted or taken out of context, though she stopped short of apologizing outright. "I've always believed in speaking from the heart," she said, her voice steady but tinged with emotion. "Sometimes that means saying things that challenge people's perspectives, but I stand by my intentions, to fight for fairness and justice." Her words struck a chord with some viewers who appreciated her honesty. However, others weren't convinced. Critics pointed out that admitting to being misunderstood wasn't the same as acknowledging mistakes. Social media lit up, again, with supporters rallying behind her while detractors accused her of dodging accountability. The divide only deepened as clips from the interview spread across platforms, each side cherry-picking moments to support their arguments. Meanwhile, Pam Bondi continued her strategic approach, appearing on multiple talk shows and engaging with grassroots organizations. Unlike Crockett, who had opted for a single high-stakes interview, Bondi spread her message far and wide. She spoke passionately about the importance of integrity and transparency, often referencing specific examples from the debate to reinforce her points. Her calm, methodical style contrasted sharply with Crockett's emotional appeal, making her seem like the more reliable figure to many undecided observers. Bondi also made a point to avoid personal attacks. When asked directly about Crockett, during an interview, she responded diplomatically, "This isn't about one person, it's about setting a standard for how we engage in these conversations. If we're going to solve big problems, we need to be honest with ourselves and with the public." It was a savvy move, positioning herself not as an opponent, but as someone focused on the bigger picture. Crockett, however, struggled to maintain her composure as the days went on. Each new critique felt like another blow, and the pressure began to show. In subsequent appearances, she occasionally came across as defensive, even flustered. During one heated exchange with a host who pressed her on inconsistencies in her past statements, she snapped back, "You're twisting my words just like everyone else." The remark quickly became fodder for late-night comedians, further damaging her image. Bondi, ever the strategist, seized these moments to reinforce her position, without appearing opportunistic. In a radio interview shortly after Crockett's outburst, she remarked, "Passion is important, but so is patience. When emotions run high, it's easy to lose sight of the facts. My goal has always been to keep the conversation grounded in truth." Her comments resonated with listeners, many of whom praised her ability to stay composed under pressure. As the week wore on, the media circus reached fever pitch. News outlets dissected every word both women said, comparing their approaches and debating who was winning the war of words. Some pundits argued that Crockett's emotional vulnerability made her relatable, while others saw Bondi's unflappable demeanor as a sign of true leadership. Late-night hosts joked about turning the feud into a reality TV show, complete with dramatic music and slow-motion replays of key moments. But beyond the headlines and hashtags, the impact on both women was undeniable. For Crockett, the toll was visible. Friends noticed she seemed withdrawn, skipping social events and spending long hours holed up in her office. One close confidant revealed that she'd been losing sleep, replaying every decision and wondering if she'd underestimated Bondi's resolve. Despite her struggles, she refused to give up. She doubled down on connecting with everyday people, attending community events and listening to their concerns. It was a smart move. Reminding voters of her roots helped soften some of the criticism aimed at her. Bondi, too, faced challenges, though they were less obvious. While her cool-headed approach earned widespread praise, some critics accused her of being overly calculated or lacking warmth. A few commentators even suggested she was using the situation to boost her own profile rather than focusing on the issues. Bondi shrugged off the accusations, staying true to her strategy of letting her actions speak louder than any rebuttal. By the end of this chapter, it was clear that neither woman was backing down. Crockett fought to rebuild trust, pouring her energy into grassroots efforts and hoping to win back skeptics one conversation at a time. Bondi, meanwhile, remained steadfast in her mission to champion transparency and accountability, building alliances and expanding her reach. Both were bruised but unbowed, each determined to emerge stronger from the chaos. The battle between them had evolved from a clash of ideas into something deeper, a test of resilience, character, and the power of perception. And as the world watched, one thing became certain: this story was far from over. Weeks turned into months and the dust began to settle, but not entirely. The clash between the two women had left its mark, both on their careers and on the public's perception of them. For Jasmine Crockett, the fallout was undeniable. Her once stellar reputation had taken a hit, and the road to recovery seemed longer and harder than she'd imagined. Donors who had once eagerly supported her campaigns were now hesitant, questioning whether aligning with her would reflect poorly on their own agendas. Invitations to speak at high-profile events dwindled, replaced by quieter, smaller gatherings where she could connect directly with grassroots supporters. Crockett spent much of her time traveling to these local events, meeting people face to face, and reminding them of why they'd believed in her in the first place. She listened to their stories, shared laughs over coffee, and even rolled up her sleeves to help out at community projects. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was necessary. Slowly, she started to rebuild trust, not through grand speeches or flashy promises, but through genuine human connection. People noticed. Some still criticized her past missteps, but others admired her determination to keep going despite the odds. Behind the scenes, however, things weren't as smooth. Crockett's team was divided. Some advisors pushed for a more aggressive approach, urging her to go after Bondi again and reclaim dominance in the narrative. Others argued that doubling down would only dig her deeper into trouble. Tensions ran high during strategy meetings, with heated arguments breaking out almost daily. Crockett found herself caught in the middle, torn between conflicting opinions. At night, she often sat alone in her office, staring at notes and wondering if she'd made the right choices. Doubt lingered like a shadow, whispering questions she couldn't answer. On the other side, Pam Bondi continued to rise in prominence. Her calm, measured approach had struck a chord with many, earning her respect across political lines. Media appearances became less frequent as she shifted her focus to advocacy work, choosing to let her actions speak louder than words. She visited schools, spoke at town halls, and worked alongside organizations tackling issues close to her heart. Her message remained consistent. Accountability matters, not just for leaders but for everyone. This authenticity resonated deeply with people who crave stability in uncertain times. Yet Bondi wasn't immune to criticism either. Some accused her of being too rigid, lacking the warmth needed to truly inspire others. Late-night comics joked about her robotic precision, poking fun at her no-nonsense demeanor. While Bondi brushed off most of the negativity, there were moments when the pressure showed. Friends noticed she spent long hours poring over reports and preparing for upcoming engagements, determined not to leave anything to chance. Even though she projected confidence publicly, privately, she wrestled with doubts of her own. Had she gone too far? Was this feud overshadowing the real issues she cared about? Despite their differences, both women shared one thing: exhaustion. The constant scrutiny, the endless debates, the weight of expectations, it all took a toll. Neither had anticipated how personal this battle would become, nor how deeply it would affect their lives. For Crockett, it meant sleepless nights and strained relationships. For Bondi, it meant sacrificing downtime and grappling with the realization that success came with sacrifices. As the months passed, something interesting happened. The media frenzy began to die down, replaced by newer scandals and controversies. But the impact of their confrontation lingered. Supporters of both women reflected on what they'd witnessed. Not just the arguments themselves, but the lessons embedded within them. Accountability, integrity, resilience. These themes echoed long after the headlines faded. For Crockett, the experience served as a wake-up call. She realized that passion alone wasn't enough. Preparation and consistency mattered just as much. She vowed to be more mindful of her words, knowing how quickly they could be twisted or scrutinized. For Bondi, it reinforced her belief in staying grounded. While she celebrated her victories, she also acknowledged the cost of such battles. Winning wasn't everything. It was how you carried yourself along the way that defined your legacy. By the end of this chapter, both women stood transformed. They weren't the same as they'd been before the clash. Crockett emerged humbler, wiser, and more determined to prove herself anew. Bondi, meanwhile, solidified her role as a voice of reason, using her platform to advocate for change rather than personal gain. Their paths might never cross again in the same explosive way, But the ripple effects of their encounter would continue to shape their journeys and the world around them for years to come. Months had passed since the explosive showdown, and life moved on for everyone except the two women at the center of it all. The headlines had faded, replaced by newer stories that captured the public's fleeting attention. But for Jasmine Crockett and Pam Bondi, the aftermath of their clash continued to shape their lives in ways neither had fully anticipated. It wasn't just about winning or losing anymore. It was about what they chose to do next. For Jasmine Crockett, the journey forward was slow but steady. She poured her energy into grassroots efforts, showing up where people least expected her. From volunteering at food banks to speaking at small community centers, she worked tirelessly to rebuild trust one person at a time. At first, some attendees were skeptical. They'd seen her fiery speeches before, and now they wondered if this quieter version of her was genuine or just a calculated move. But over time, something shifted. People began to see her not as a distant figure under bright lights, but as someone willing to roll up her sleeves and get her hands dirty. One evening, after a long day of meeting with local residents, Crockett sat down with an older woman who ran a neighborhood outreach program. The woman looked her straight in the eye and said, "You've got heart, I'll give you that, but actions matter more than words." Those words stuck with Crockett like glue. That night, she wrote them down in her journal, circling them several times as if to etch them permanently into her mind. From then on, she stopped focusing so much on defending herself and started asking questions instead. What did people really need? How could she help without making promises she couldn't keep? Her transformation didn't go unnoticed. Slowly, but surely supporters began returning to her corner, not because she had changed everything about herself, but because she had shown humility. Humility, it turned out, was a powerful thing. It opened doors that once seemed shut tight. By leaning into her mistakes and learning from them, Crockett proved that setbacks don't have to define you. They can refine you. On the other side, Pam Bondi faced her own challenges. Her rise in popularity brought opportunities, but also new pressures. Invitations poured in, from speaking engagements to book deals, but she turned down most of them. Instead, she focused on causes she truly cared about, working behind the scenes to create meaningful change. She visited schools to talk to students about integrity and accountability, sharing stories from her own career without ever sounding preachy. One teacher later remarked, "She made honesty feel cool again." But Bondi wasn't immune to reflection either. Late at night, when the world was quiet, she often thought about the confrontation. Had she been too harsh? Could she have handled things differently? These questions gnawed at her, reminding her that even the best intentions can leave scars. Still, she refused to dwell on regret. Instead, she used those moments of doubt to remind herself why she did what she did. Not for glory, but for truth. The ripple effects of their battle extended far beyond the two women themselves. Across the country, conversations sparked about leadership, accountability, and the power of words. Teachers used clips of their debate in classrooms to teach critical thinking skills. Journalists wrote op-eds dissecting the importance of fact-checking versus emotional appeals. Even late-night comedians softened their tone, acknowledging that while the clash had been entertaining, it had also highlighted deeper truths about human nature. As time went on, both women found themselves crossing paths less frequently. Their orbits no longer collided in the same dramatic way, but the lessons they'd learned stayed with them. For Crockett, it was the realization that passion needed balance. Fire was good, but so was light. For Bondi, it was the understanding that holding others accountable didn't mean shutting down compassion. Both emerged stronger, wiser, and more aware of the weight their voices carried. Years later, when asked about the incident during separate interviews, neither woman shied away from discussing it. Crockett admitted it had been a turning point, a moment that forced her to grow in ways she hadn't imagined. Bondi described it as a reminder that standing firm doesn't mean standing alone. Though they likely wouldn't call each other friends, there was a mutual respect that hadn't existed before. After all, battles like theirs rarely end with clear winners or losers. They leave behind lessons, scars, and sometimes even unexpected growth. In the end, their story became more than just a tale of rivalry. It was proof that conflict, when handled with purpose, can lead to progress. For every heated argument, there's a chance to listen. For every mistake, there's an opportunity to learn. And for every challenge, there's a decision to be made about who you want to become. As the world moved on, Jasmine Crockett and Pam Bondi remained symbols of resilience. Not perfect, but persistent. And perhaps that was the greatest victory of all.